Our next guest, our first proper guest of the morning, has interviewed politicians, TV stars. He's had a letter from Tony Blair. Yesterday, I think he was interviewing Alistair Campbell. He's 15 years old, destined for a career in the media, we reckon. He's from Dunfermline and Fife. It's Robert Weir. Morning, Robert.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. How was Alistair Campbell?
Very interesting. It was great to have him on, to speak to him, because I'm a huge sort of fan. Well, I certainly look at politics, and he's certainly been talked about a lot, and he's been illustrated in like the thick of it, for example. Yeah. Vaguely, and he's had a very interesting life, so it was very interesting to speak to him.
And for research, would you have tackled any of his diaries or anything like that?
Well, it's interesting. I watched a program with him in it, and he talked very honestly about I think many people know he had a problem with depression, and he was very honest about that, and I thought I couldn't interview Alistair Campbell without really getting to know Alistair Campbell, so I touched on his battle with depression, and he talked to me very honestly. I think it was very interesting to hear, and also he knew Tony Blair better than possibly Gordon Brown and Peter Mandelson, so it was very interesting to hear, from a real primary source what Tony Blair was like.
And the interviews with Alistair over the years, a lot of people have asked him, in retrospect, would he have made any different suggestions to the Prime Minister about whether the Iraq war was legal or otherwise, or whether we should have gone to war. So far, he's still sticking with the party line from then. Did you ask him if he, now that we're further down the line, a few more years have passed, has he changed his mind?
Well, it's interesting because he talks a lot when he was working with Tony Blair that he was conscious the whole party appeared as a soap opera. And I asked him, looking back on the years, he spent a long time with Tony Blair, do you think it appeared like a soap opera, and do you think that it was a success overall? And unsurprisingly, he obviously said it was a success. He wasn't going to say anything else. But I thought it was interesting to look at the Labour that is now, that Tony Blair's left, and I asked him if the likes of Ed Miliband can really pose a threat, a realistic threat, to David Cameron and George Osborne.
What did he say?
Well, it's interesting because he, in the past, hasn't been so sure. He thinks that Labour in general haven't done enough to stand up to David Cameron and the Conservative Party, and now he feels that Ed Miliband can do it. Whether or not I agree, that's a different, that's a whole different matter. But it was very interesting, and a very honest guy.
And on you go, Carl.
No, I was just going to say, who's the most? This is away from politics. Who's the most difficult interviewee you've had?
Well,
apart from Jackie Bird, because I want to ask you about Jackie Bird.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Jackie Bird.
So she was difficult.
She was in the car. She was in the car at the time, so it was brilliant to speak to her. But Vince Cable spoke to me very kindly. He came away from a business conference that he was at and spoke to me for 5 minutes. So only, his only member of cabinet and shadow cabinet to agree to an interview. And he spoke to me, and he did it this way. He liked to answer the question. He didn't like to talk too much, but
Right.
I mean, he answered the question, and at the end of the day, that's what I was looking for. But you know how you interview people on the phone and you speak to them afterwards for a bit. Literally, Vince Cable was like, "Thank you very much, goodbye." Hung up.
He didn't give you anything else.
Nothing else.
Busy
But
man.
it was great to speak to him, and absolutely, he was very busy. So.
All right. Well, you can ask about Jackie in just a second. For our listeners, where can they hear your interviews, Robert?
Every interview I've done can be can be listened to by visiting my website, which is www.robertweir.co.uk, and you can follow me on Twitter at Robert Weir Media to keep up to date with all the interviews.
Would you specifically want to get into radio, or do you want to broaden it into television as well?
Well, I mean,
and the supplementary is, and would it be politically biased? I mean, is it political interviews that is your thing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people I've had on, I'm speaking to, fortunately, I'm speaking to Alex Salmond in a few weeks' time, interviewing him, and then later in the year, Gordon Brown. So it just so happens that everyone I'm sort of interviewing does seem to be in politics, but apart from Philip Schofield, who was a very interesting guy. I think in the future, hopefully, it's interesting because I speak to friends, and for example, they talk about their latest FIFA game and who they're buying on FIFA, to which I cannot relate at all, because I mean, my Robin van Persie is probably Andrew Marr, which sounds really sad to say, but I just don't. I mean, I actually got an email from Jeremy Paxman, and he's agreed to an interview, which is, that is my
Brilliant.
Premier League footballer. So, that's definitely something that I'd hope to do in the future. Yeah,
and that's an interesting story as well. That was on the brief that came through about Robert, that he'd contacted Jeremy Paxman's agent, and they said no, he wouldn't be interested at all. But you then found a way to email him directly.
It was very funny that, because I emailed their agent and they're like, oh, Jeremy sends on his best wishes but sadly can't do it. I managed to find his personal email address and emailed him, and he said absolutely, we'll just have to find a date. So it was interesting.
And then you can just hear Paxman on the phone to his PA, change my email.
Exactly.
Keep that way.
What have you brought in with you there? Can I ask you?
Well, yeah, the producer asked me to bring in the letter from Tony Blair.
All right.
So
I'll pass it over to Fred.
Yeah, sure.
And you can ask about Jackie Buck.
Yeah, give
why
us
you're
the
so
dirt.
intrigued.
Dish the dirt. Oh, I just want to know.
No, Jackie was a very interesting interview. It was great to hear, about her.
It's okay, we're not on air now. You can just tell us the truth.
Are we not?
No, yeah, we are.
Okay. We trap. I almost fell into there. No, it was brilliant to speak to Jackie. It was very interesting about her career in broadcasting, and also
her hair.
Her hair. Didn't talk too much about that, if at all. But I asked her about if she could be, what she thought about Scottish independence, given she works for the BBC, it's British Broadcasting Corporation, and she very firmly just said she doesn't concern herself with that, so that was fine. That was the end of that. So yeah, it was just very interesting, and I'm hugely thankful to all those who agree, because at the end of the day, I'm only 15 years old.
I know you've done amazing.
I'm not Jeremy Paxman, so
who's still up there? Who you just still want to get hold of? Now that you've got Fred clearly, but the next one.
Sure. I thought that question might be asked, and I think my real aim, and it's totally ambitious and probably way out my reach, but you've got to aim high, is probably Tony Blair. I got a letter from him, and I've got...
And there is the letter, yeah. It says that not only did he get your letter, he's very busy, and you can imagine that's maybe somebody from his office that said that. But then it goes on to say, listen to a bit of your show, you're a good broadcaster, and wish you all the very best.
Exactly. So,
follow up.
Indeed,
Anyway, the thing about radio and live radio here, Robert, is that the time doesn't stand still. So you've mentioned Andrew Marr would be your Robin van Persie.
Yeah.
I'm probably, I don't know, maybe your Stephen Fletcher. Or something
you're
like that.
you're my Messi, but sure, Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo.
So if you have any questions for me, fire ahead.
Okay. So graduating in 1978 from the University of Dundee with a degree in accountancy, how do you go from being a graduated accountant with a degree to a stand-up comic?
Well, that's a very good question. It's one that I've been asked an awful lot, because people seem to think that in accountancy there is no sense of humour. I always had a sense of humour. My family, my mum and dad always had good lines as well, my brother and sister as well. And Karen was asking what you wanted to be early on. I wanted to be in entertainment. But accountancy was the kind of sideline. That was where I went into, because I thought I could get a job and a salary and all the rest of it, because I honestly didn't know how to get into entertainment. So if you can imagine that I always had my eye on the horizon, and that would be comedy.
Yeah.
Accountancy was a kind of, well, I'll do this until I find out how I get into that. So I always think I had a sense of humour, and I've met an awful lot of accountants over the years that do have a sense of humour. So that was always the intention. The actual nuts and bolts of moving into it was, thank goodness, through a competition called So You Think You're Funny.
Yeah.
That was in Mayfest in 1988. And you had to submit material of your own, and if they liked that, they gave you a spot standing on the stage for 5 minutes. That was it.
And as a stand-up, I can imagine certainly one of the biggest fears would be an audience that isn't very responsive. When you're on stage, and I know you had a gig once at Glen Eagles, and it was full of very important people who weren't too involved, to say the least. How do you cope with a really tough crowd?
There are various things go through your mind while you're on stage. One of them, unfortunately, is not to say, "Oh, I've had enough of this, I'll walk off and let's just admit defeat." You try and plough your way out of it, and that is it's a story I've told again a few times, and it was a charity event. It was for Sir Steve Redgrave, and I died that night. No laughs at all. You've just got to. The good thing about doing stand-up is that my recovery only took 24 hours, because I had another gig the next night. And almost word for word, the material worked.
It's funny, that, isn't it?
It's a very strange thing. But
Audiences
as it happens, and as it's happening to you, your mind goes into free fall. It's a horrible, horrible thing to have to go through.
And to those who are listening, they may be aspiring young comics. what advice would you give to them to be as successful as you are?
Well, you can't guarantee success, and there's barely a day goes by that I don't kind of thank my lucky stars, because there are an awful lot of people out there doing the same as I do, and maybe don't have the same degree of success. But
there's a lot of people out there that aren't funny.
there's
They think they are. I'll give it
that.
you are, Fred.
And there's a lot of people who are maybe just as funny, who have got exceptional careers, okay? But, you know, if I had a suit and a floppy fringe, I might have been that man. What I would say, though, seriously, Robert, is and it's the same line that inspired me to actually do something about my career, was if you think you've got a talent for something and you want to do it, then do it. Because nobody's going to come and offer it to you. I once got a letter from somebody who said, I've been thinking about writing sketches for 30 years, but nobody from the BBC has ever got in touch with me. And you kind of think, well, they're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to come around knocking on your door. So my advice would be, if you want to do stand-up specifically, get yourself on stage as often as you possibly can. And you'll do an awful lot of gigs for no money. Some of them will be 3 minutes, some of them will be 5 minutes, some of them will be 10 minutes. But get yourself on stage as much as you possibly can.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for having me in today.
Thank you. Great questions.
Good
And
luck.
if you'd like, we can do a longer interview another time.
Absolutely, that'd be
your
brilliant.
website. So,
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. So if Tony Blair pulls out,
Yeah,
give me a shout, okay?
I certainly will.
And I won't be Vince Cable. Although it's 10 to 11, you have to get out.
Indeed.
Robert, many thanks.
Thank you very much.
There is a name. Robert Weir, folks.
Yes.
Keep an eye on
Heard
that
it here
name.
first.
Yeah. Coming up, the